Yep, we're now live.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon's meeting of the Northamptonshire Schools Forum. This is an extraordinary meeting. It's an additional meeting primarily to receive some proposals regarding early years funding in advance of consultation documents being sent out. Just before we start, probably two business notes for things. I think there's probably an observer from Department for Education who's in attendance in respect of the current agenda, and I thought actually it would be quite useful for us just to go around and introduce ourselves so that it is clear there who each of us are for the benefit of the member from the Department for Education. So my name's James Birkett. I'm the chair of Northamptonshire Schools Forum, and I'm CEO of the Nen Valley Partnership, which is a small trust of 1 secondary and 2 primary schools. I'll invite people as kind of they appear on my screen, if that's okay. So Siobhan, you're next.
Hello, yeah, I'm Siobhan Hearn. I'm principal of the Latimer Arts College, which is the only maintained secondary school in the county.
And Joe.
Hello, I'm Jo Hutchinson. I'm head of school effectiveness in the north of the county.
Okay, thanks. Anne-Marie. I think you're muted, Anne-Marie.
Yeah, my computer doesn't want to play ball with me. Hello, colleagues. I'm Anne-Marie Dodds. I'm the Interim Director of Children's Services for Northamptonshire.
Thank you. And Angela?
Hi, I'm Angela Prodger. I'm one of the joint heads at Pengreen Centre in Corby.
Annabelle?
Hi, I'm Annabelle Moore. I'm Head of Finance at Peterborough Diocese Education Trust. I'm just standing in for Lee Hughes today, the CFO, because it clashes with something else. So it's a 33 school, primary school only trust in Northamptonshire.
Thanks. Paul?
Hi, I'm Paul Wheeler. I am the Vice Chair of Schools Forum, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer for East Midlands Academy Trust.
Peter?
Good afternoon. I'm Peter Cantley, Director of Education for Peterborough Diocese.
Thanks, Peter. Sandra?
Afternoon, everyone. I'm Sandra Appleby, and I am Head Teacher at Greenfields Primary School and Nursery and Regional Director for the David Ross Education Trust.
Nikki?
Hi, Nikki Lamond, Executive Principal of Danesholm Infant and Danesholm Junior Academies, representing Greenwood Academies Trust.
Thanks. Joe?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jo Sanchez-Thompson. I'm CEO of the Learning for Life Education Trust, which is a small primary trust in East Northants.
Thanks. Neil?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Neil Goddard. I'm the Interim Assistant Director of Education for the Northants area.
Charlotte?
Hi, good afternoon. Charlotte Franks. I am the head of the virtual school for children in care.
Kelly?
Afternoon, everyone. I'm Kelly Mills. I'm Early Years Manager for the Northamptonshire Council.
Yoki?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Yoki O'Brien. I'm the Strategic Finance Business Partner for Children's Services at Northamptonshire Council.
Thanks. Rob?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Rob Hardcastle, CEO of Hatton Academies Trust.
Nick?
Afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to see if I can switch on my camera just so you can actually see me. Just bear with me. Okay. Afternoon, everyone. I'm Nick Mantle and I'm from the SFA, so I'm the observer that was alluded to earlier in the call. My role in the SFA straddles a couple of different areas. I work quite heavily with pre-16 COVID recovery grants, been quite heavily involved with summer schools grants and things like that recently, but I also do a lot of work on early years disapplications, hence why I've asked to come along today just in an observer capacity, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's perfect. You're very welcome, Nick. Thank you. And Tony, I think, is our grand finale.
Hello everybody, I'm Tony Chandler. Apologies, first of all, I can't get my camera working. I'll continue to try. I'm Assistant Director of Commissioning and Partnerships for North and Northants Council Children's Services.
Wonderful, that's great. Welcome everybody, and we won't run a recall test at the end of the meeting on everyone's roles and job titles. The second probably business note before we speak is we did receive, I know the local authority apologised for papers going out late. The aim is normally for 7 days in advance, and we did receive a request to postpone the meeting and move that backwards. In the event, and after some discussion, there isn't a requirement to publish 7 days in advance, although the local authority do always aim for that, and as Forum we always aim for that. And we also felt that there was a potential detriment in that if we were to postpone for a week, then it would have necessitated a slight reduction in actually the amount of time for formal consultation following this meeting. And also worth noting that actually the purpose of this meeting doesn't have any votes to make decisions. Actually, it is an opportunity to look at the papers and to look at some of the proposals prepared by the local authority in advance of the consultation. So on balance, although of course, it would have been ideal to get the papers out 7 days in advance, we considered that there would be a greater detriment by postponing, in that it would have then been a reduced amount of consultation time. But I thought it was probably worthwhile bringing that request to Forum's attention from the outset. So just in terms of moving on to the actual business of the current agenda, I think we've had apologies, Secretary, from Sharon Pinson. Are there any other apologies received?
Also from Lee Hughes and Annabelle's attending as a substitute.
Right, okay, that's great, thank you. And I don't think there are any Forum membership changes to report, is that correct?
Correct, Chair. No Forum changes.
Yeah, perfect. And also, in terms of declarations of interest, none have been received.
No, I haven't received any declarations.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. And just moving on to the minutes of the meeting on the 20th of January. This was a meeting that I couldn't attend, so I think Paul chaired this meeting. But we do just need to obviously confirm that the minutes are an accurate record, although some of the action points I think will be picked up not in this meeting, but in the meeting on the 17th of March. So any comments on accuracy for page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5. Right, so if we could just give sort of nods to confirm that we're happy with that as a true and accurate record of the meeting. Hi, sorry, Joe. I think you're muted, Joe.
Sorry, I was just saying, yes, I agree to the minutes.
No, sorry, perfect. I didn't spot the visual cue there. And I think just in points of things to make sure we pick up on the 17th of March, I think there's the proposed terms of reference for the task and finish group, but I suggest that that's something we pick up, not in this meeting, but on the 17th of March. Great. So 2 items on early years. One is a more general proposal for early years funding. It's item 3. So I'm just going to hand over to Tony for this.
Thank you, Chairman. And again, apologies for not being on screen. So this is a paper outlining our proposals for early years funding non-maintained schools. We are trailing here, I think, the proposed consultation questions that we will issue after this this forum. So we'll take comments made today and adapt those. In particular, we're looking for comment on the proposed budgets set below for in the paper for the funding streams at table 1. You can see in that table the rates that were paid in the current financial year, how much we're proposing, and what the increase or freeze in the case of one of them would be. We're also looking for Schools Forum to consider the central costs for the 3- and 4-year-old budget only, which is item 2.1 in the paper, and as I said, to approve the consultation questions to go out. I do need to hold my hand up, Chair, to an error. So you will see that in the main report, there are certain levels of activity which we intend to go out, again, in table 1. We weren't able, before the papers came out, to adjust the questions to reflect what's proposed in the paper. So to be really clear, at the last page, the draft questions, we're going to suggest that question 1 would be, do you support the local authority's proposal to add 16p to the base rate for 3- and 4-year-olds? At question 2, we're saying, do you support the authority's proposals to add 2p to the deprivation rate for 3- and 4-year-olds? Question 4, it would be 19p to the 2-year-old funding rate. And question 6, it would be about proposals regarding the freezing of notional send. And I think we would look to add something to that to draw out consultees' views on how we should spend that money. And I think I'll pause then and take questions if that's okay.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. So just for my own clarity of thought, so the rates that are on the table on page 1 are the correct ones, but the consultation questions don't reflect that yet.
That's exactly right. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, perfect. That is great. I just wonder if it'd be used to. I mean, it seems as though the primary change is around the inclusion fund. Is it worth saying something on that and the proposals there?
Yeah, I hope it's okay, but I'm actually going to ask my colleague Neil to come in and assist me on this, because this is a relatively new area of work for me and it's really important that we get it right. Is that okay, Neil?
Yeah, of course, Tony. Happy to expand as best I can. So there are, as you can see from the paper, there are a number of elements that come together here, but basically we have money which is provided to providers through a formulaic basis based on pupil numbers or deprivation assessed on postcode, those sorts of things. And I should say at the start, I'm talking about 3- and 4-year-old funding in the main here, because this is the part the question relates to. And then there is money that we retain and have historically passed to providers on the basis of applications based on additional need. Now, those forum members who are here at the last meeting, remember we had a very similar conversation about schools and high needs funding at that meeting. And what we're doing here is reflecting the same thing, which is this non-statutory application for additional high needs funding is not sustainable within the broader budget. Okay, we know the high needs block budget is under significant stress. The early years budget also all parts of the DSG, and that's very common across the country. So what we're saying is we want to put the maximum we can through the formulaic allocations to providers, so hence the 16p increase in the base rate and the protection of the 8p notional SEND rate. And what we want to do is clarify that notional SEND rate to be very clear that that is about SEND, and in our workings with providers, be very clear about how that money is being used to meet need. Okay, so SEND money in the first instance will very clearly be coming through the formulaic allocation, as I would suggest regulations suggest it should do. So that's part of that. The inclusion fund, we're going to put some money into it, and I think the figure is £160,000. And we're going to manage that by being more targeted in exactly the same way we had the conversation about schools at the last meeting up until the end of August, over which time the task and finish group, which will include an early years piece of work, will look at how we better support high needs more generally across the broader high needs block budget, early years budget, schools budget, those sorts of things. Okay, so what you've got here is an absolute replication of what we did under the schools proposals at the last meeting that were approved, replicated in the early years proposal. So, like I say, the question, and as Tony says, we need to find the right words for this, is the support for ensuring we protect the formulaic allocation to all providers, whilst reducing the inclusion fund with a view to taking a more targeted approach and reviewing in over the course of the period up until the start of the next financial year, in line with what we're doing with schools. Is that a proposal providers would support? And like I say, I think, you know, the underlying element of this is we should be passing as much as we can to providers to give them the flexibility to address needs in the innovative, joined up, coherent way that they I'm sure they already do and would want to continue to do by providing additional resource to them to do such a thing. So like I say, I think what we're doing is very much in line with expectation and regulation, but it is quite a significant change from previous years when there was the opportunity to apply for additional funding. And whilst that will still be there up until August, that will be much more targeted and restricted due to the protection of the formulaic funding. I hope that was clear enough, because, like I say, it is a replication, hopefully, of what you heard me say about schools funding last time.
Yeah, that was really, really clear. Thanks, Neil. So we have a couple of questions there. So Sandra.
I think
you're muted, Sandra, actually.
Muted and camera off, camera on. I think I was the last to put my hand up. So Joe and Angela, I didn't know if they had a question first, but can I ask around the notional SEND funding and the proposal of increasing that amount to 12p. It occurs to me, and probably somebody else can put this in better words, is there protection for settings where SEND needs are disproportionate? So whilst the idea of increasing might enable another area of the budget to be bolstered, it occurs to me that it's going to be potentially really challenging for some of our settings to meet the needs of SEN children when you have got a disproportionate number of pupils requiring very specialist support.
If I could come back in, Chairman, is that okay?
Yes, yeah, fine.
And Neil, if you want to add to my superficial response, so I think we're actually in the paper proposing a freeze on that element of notional send. I think the point that Neil was making, in fact, was to recognise the point that you were making, which is that we clearly have budget pressures, but we want to make sure the money gets to where the needs are. And that's what the proposal, or the consultation proposal is to try and find out what ideas people have about how we do that. Neil, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Tony. If that's okay, Chair, I'd only really echo what Tony said. This is one of those errors Tony alluded to at the start, and I'm really sorry that it is in that way. Those questions have changed, and that 8p has been frozen. And part of the reason that 8p has been frozen is to create the inclusion fund, the small inclusion fund of 160,000 that we're going to use in a more targeted way over the period up until the end of August. So that's why it looks how it does. Obviously, there is a conversation to be had, and I hope we have it through the task and finish group, about how we most accurately and effectively target SEND funding through early years. But once again, you know, in line with, I think, expectation and regulation, and understanding that SEN comes in many different forms. All providers are dealing with some element of SEND, and that is delivered through the formulaic funding is the route that we want to take at this point to protect that. Like I say, with a view that the task and finish group may take a view further on. What I would say, of course, is the deprivation funding has been increased somewhat, and that is more targeted based on postcode and other sort of assessments. But that's the balance that we want to get views on, really. So your view is entirely valid, of course. That you could be more targeted with SEND. And perhaps the responses we'll get through the consultation is you should hold on to more into the inclusion fund and target it more. This is the balance that we felt was appropriate to present to you, but this is a consultation.
Yeah, and so again, just for clarity, is that if there were providers that felt actually they were dealing with a kind of a manageable need, that's the purpose of the inclusion fund, to access the additional monies there. Sandra, does that answer the question? Is there anything you want to come back on?
Yes, at this point, I would say it does. I have my own personal views, obviously, and I don't want to keep talking.
Joe.
I'll keep talking for Sandra. So I see that the base rate has been increased, and that's about 4%. Of an increase. However, in a preschool nursery provision, we aren't going to get any grant that's going to cover the increase to national insurance or whatever it's going to be called, and any pay rises that are going through. So that 4% increase is gone straight away in whatever pay rises and national insurances. So actually there's no, you talk about there's more money and we put more money in that, but that's gone immediately because we are not covered by any pay grants that might come from the government for other areas of the school system in terms of those two things that I mentioned. So I hear that, and I do just want to keep raising the point that we are seeing an increased level of need coming in to early years, and we have to I hear 160,000, but how many providers are there? And how many children are there? That's a very, very tiny amount of money. And I know what the issue is, and the issue is money, but I just think I need to say it.
Joe, that is one of the points you're making there about the kind of wider issue of the inadequacy of funding, rather than the way in which these proposals are slicing up the income that's available.
Yes, it is. There is not enough money, and I that's what I said. I completely understand that, and it's an increase. But there's also an issue here about we are paying staff, and all of those staff increases, which will be covered by grants for staff who work in, from the age of 5 upwards, the levy grant, etc. That's not coming in for children who are in early years below reception. So actually there are increased costs there that are going to hit us quite hard. Yeah. And there's no money coming in to cover that, as there is for schools.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Angela.
Hi, I'm coming in as well around the money for SEND, really, and thinking that what we have seen in the last 2 years is a significant rise in the number of children who are presenting with need and not been seen by colleagues in health and education, and more recently in this local authority where there's been a stop, a circuit breaker to our specialist support services. So children have got undiagnosed need, and we're really pushing to try and get these children the service that they absolutely should have. We have 34 children currently in receipt of high needs funding in our organisation. So there is a higher number. We know from research there are more and more children with SEND because of medical advances and those kind of things. And I think Joe, you said it, this is about balancing budgets, but actually, you know, when is the problem going to be addressed? Because we're having more and more children with need and we're putting less and less money to it. This is not a criticism of this authority. My criticism would be, what are we doing as an authority to take this to central government as a, you know, a real issue that must be addressed? You know, yes, you've got, you know, we've got a purse that we need to fit within, but actually we've got children who deserve services, and if we're not doing anything and we're you know, freezing services and not doing things for children who haven't been seen, they've spent their life with needs not being seen by anybody. So the children who are coming to us now, 3, are children who have lived through the pandemic and not been seen by professionals. It's not good enough. You know, so yes, this is the money we've got, but my question is, what are we going to do about it? We have some responsibility.
Yeah, I think those are both really, really fair points. And I think, yeah, there is a distinction, isn't there, between the way in which the proposals to slice up the actual funding we do have. And, you know, does anybody from the local authority, Anne-Marie, do you want to come in and answer that about the influence that we may be able to exert regarding a kind of paucity of funding compared to the need that's there?
Yeah, two things. The first one I wanted to pick up on, though, Chair, if I might, is, and apologies, I couldn't work out how to raise my hand. I should know by now, but I'm a Teams girl, I'm afraid, not a Zoom girl. The circuit breaker, which Angela referenced, I think I just wanted to clarify on that, because I know there's been much made across social media predominantly around this, and some local media have picked up on it. The circuit breaker was not actually a stop in services. It was a careless use of language about a month or so ago. What we have done with the support services is we've moved from a referral system to a consultation system. And what that move has done has meant that we can immediately have a conversation with a setting, parent, family who require support. And they have a conversation rather than fill in a referral form. And what that means is that the previous waiting time was in the region of 16 weeks, and we have managed to halve that waiting time for an intervention to 8 weeks from 16 weeks by having a consultation rather than a referral process. So the use of language around circuit breaker was a circuit breaker in terms of stopping a referral system. So it was the referral that was stopped rather than the delivery of services that was stopped. And that circuit breaker period was running through till Easter, while the service managed immediate consultation at the same time as they were closing down the existing referrals that were in the system. So I just thought it was important, because out of context, that would suggest that we'd stopped delivering services, which we didn't. In terms of conversations with central government, I have had this, Angela and I have previously had this conversation. Angela and I have agreed that we need to find a mechanism where we can raise the voices. From my perspective, this is a conversation that I have nationally with the Association of Directors of Children's Services. It's also a conversation that I have regionally with fellow directors of children's services across the region. I have also had a conversation with the chief exec and the lead member for children's services, Councillor Scott Edwards, about how we might progress this and how we might raise this. Obviously, colleagues will appreciate that this is politically sensitive, and we just want to be absolutely certain that anything that we do raise directly with the Department for Education is with the agreement of the leader of the council, and this is a conversation that I will progress through corporate and through the political leadership in Northants. I think that covers it, James. Thanks.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. Yoki, I think you're...
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, in answer to Joe's question, the Department for Education have actually announced a school supplementary grant, okay, for all nursery pre-16 and post-16 authorities, and so they will be announcing what the allocations will be in spring 2022. This is to address the health and social care levy, i.e. the increase in national insurance pressures that schools will face, and other wider cost pressures. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Rob.
Thanks, James. Just a question really to Joachim, probably Neil and Anne-Marie. We know that the schools this year, the early years block is on 22.4 million. Do we have any idea, and Joachim, I think you were just sort of starting to allude to this, but do we have any idea about what that might look like, the 22-23? Because in the last papers at the last meeting, that was the one, I don't think we had a figure, but just, the modelling that we've done, does it give us any indication of whether that be higher or lower for 22-23?
Okay, can I come in, Chair? Yes, At present, our 22-23 indicative allocation is actually a lot lower than the 21-22 DSG allocation. Bearing in mind, our 21-22 DSG allocation is still indicative. Clearly, it will not be final until we have received January 22 census. So it's a ongoing journey. We don't know, but at present, when you look at obviously whilst the rates have risen for early years block, the child participation have gone down significantly, and as a consequence, the funding that's coming through as indicative is actually a lot lower.
Okay, so what we're thinking is that when the budget is finalised for 22-23 for the early years block, it will be lower than what we've had over 21-22.
Possibly. It all depends on child participation. Mm-hmm. But you must also remember that obviously whatever we get in our earliest block is based on child participation. If the children aren't there during the census counts, then we will not get the funding.
James, do you mind if I just have one quick follow-up?
No, please do.
Yeah, thank you. Which is, obviously, and Neil has already sort of said that all of the budgets across the blocks are tight. I don't disagree with that. At the last meeting, we spent quite a long time talking about, or possibly the meeting before actually, but we spent quite a long time talking about block transfers. And we talked about block transfers, for example, between the schools block and the high needs block. Is it possible to transfer between the schools block and the early years block?
You want me to come in and answer that, Chair? Is that...
Yeah, please do, because I certainly don't know the answer to that.
I think the answer is no. I think the only transfer from the schools block you can do is to the high needs block. However, you can transfer money from the high needs block to the early years block. If that makes sense. And historically, Northamptonshire has done that. But of course, now that the high needs block is significantly, I have to say, overspent, that transfer, we can't consult you on a transfer from high needs block to early years block because there is no remaining resource with which to transfer. And you heard last time how that's impacting on schools. So that is the possibility. And those are the transfers that you can do. It is very limited. And with any of those, of course, we have to consult the schools forum so you would be aware of them. So the only transfer that we're proposing this year is schools to high needs at the 5% level we discussed previously, and no further transfers into or out of, it's fair to say, the early years block.
Okay. My only reason for saying it is that I don't disagree with some of the comments that have been made earlier on about the fact that actually the earlier work we do to support specific families and children pays off in the long term, and therefore, I see as much of a moral purpose in school block transfers that eventually go to the early years, which saves colleagues who perhaps teach older children later on down the line having to spend much more money. So again, as this is just a sort of a comment and a suggestion opportunity, I would suggest that that's something that we do consider over the course of the year.
Thanks, Rob. Joe.
Yes, Neil, that's absolutely correct. You cannot transfer money but you can do it the way that you said you can do. So my other comment is, Yoki, we have received information that the supplementary grant will be based upon numbers from reception on upwards. If you have any information about nursery numbers, that would be really great if you could share that with us, because I haven't seen that. But the other aspect is that we have, and there's no one here who's representing the PVI, but clearly they are not schools and they will not be getting any funding from the government through that supplementary grant. So they will be funding all of those increases themselves without any supplementary grant coming in.
Okay, thank you. I will look into it and I will come back to you.
Thank you. One thing I wondered on the wider point about funding and local authority influence, and Joe, you may be able to advise me here about previous things, is whether it's appropriate for local authority and schools forum as a body to raise that formally with the DfE about our sense of how funding is. I attended an F40 webinar, I guess you'd call it, and there is a sense right throughout all of those local authorities that the funding pressures are particularly there in SEN and high needs, which is exactly our experience in Northants. So I don't know how members would feel about that if we were to kind of put something collectively together to express that is something that we are experiencing in Northamptonshire. I guess the question is, do people think that would be a useful thing to do?
James, one of the things that we can do from Forum is to write from Forum to each of the local MPs.
Yeah.
And then also to copy that into whoever the schools minister is, or whoever the minister is at the time, because there was the one time before when we did go down to London from Forum and went to meet with Nick Gibb, who obviously isn't there anymore, but to discuss a range of funding issues that were there at the time. But if we very specifically made this around SEND funding, and when we went to meet with Nick Gibb, each of the local MPs were there. So not that anything particularly changed, but at least we got our views across. Things might have changed, I don't know, but you never know with these things, do you? But actually, at least the local MPs were aware, and we could raise that profile even more with them.
Yeah, I mean, my view would be that would be worthwhile. It would be worthwhile doing.
Yeah, definitely.
Great. Angela.
I'm waiting to talk about other points in the bid if we've finished about SEND, that's all.
But for this agenda item?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, perfect. Yeah, over to you, Angela. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so Tony had just put in the chat about the centrally retained budget. I did have some questions around, could we have some costings around what these centrally retained are? We've asked for it before and have had it before, but now we just have a list of centrally retained, because obviously if 30k has been held back, I would anticipate if that's 5%, 600k extra has come into this pot, and that's all been divvied up, and we see that clearly, but we don't actually see that for the centrally retained pot to see what their increases are really. And then Disability Access Fund, it's gone up to 800, which is absolutely fabulous. But I would like to know how many people have or how many settings or how many children and families have actually been able to apply for this, because certainly for the number of children we haven't had high claims on this. So I don't know if this is a pot, again, that is capped. And if more and more people realise they can get £800, is that going to have a cap on it, or is that a cap open to all of the children? And are they going to be able to apply for this if they don't have high needs funding but have disability and living allowance? So I'd like to know a little bit more about that, please.
Thanks, Angela. Can we probably take each of those in turn? So just initially, I don't know if you have any data on the Disability Access Fund and currently how many are in receipt of that, or indeed what the total cost is, as per Angela's question. If anyone can provide further information on that would be useful.
I can certainly get that from my early years funding team and get that out fairly quickly. I know there are criteria for how people are eligibility is judged. So again, if that's not known, we can share that criteria at the same time.
Yeah.
And I think the second thing there is around the breakdown of that centrally retained budget. Is that something that you would be able to break down and circulate? And I've probably got a follow-up question with that. Is there a reason why that isn't a question on the consultation?
Again, I will invite Yoki to come in and tell me whether or not my answer is going to be accurate. But my understanding is, yes, we understand, what the cost for a profile has, and I don't see any reason why that can't be shared. And if there's a request for us to include it in the consultation questions, that's a fair request from the forum.
What would other people's views on that? Do you think that is something that should be included in consultation? Sorry, Angela, I'll come back to you there.
I think we've certainly consulted on this before, but some of the things that are on here, I think people don't understand what's been centrally retained, and a lot of these functions are necessary functions. We couldn't have the pass through of the money and those kind of things if we didn't have this. So it's not that I'm querying, what all of these things are. But, you can hold up to 5%. And, this is obviously going to take them back up to the 5%. So is there going to be money in slush? Are they going to be able to create something more? Are they the real cost? Because actually, we aren't getting any real costs as early years providers. We're just getting our extra pennies here and there. So I think, good practice would be to show year on year, if we are doing this, what those centrally retained costs are spent on, because it's a significant amount of money. And
yes, what you're talking about is transparency of information around that.
Yeah, and then and a question then for people to understand that that's what it is being spent on.
Yeah.
I don't have any problem with that.
Sorry,
so I don't have any problem with that at all. It's an excellent principle. Thank you, Angela.
Sorry, I do have two more things, James. One is about early years pupil premium. Again, great that there's an uplift to early years pupil premium, but there appears to be quite a problem with getting it paid. So we had twins in our setting. One child was eligible for pupil premium, the other one wasn't. And we have several cases like that year on year, term on term, and our numbers for pupil premium look particularly low at the moment, and we know that that isn't the case. So there is still a problem with the early years pupil premium.
My understanding, Chairman, is that that's because it's based on data from DWP. We don't have control of it as far as I know.
So we're saying that's an information issue outside.
I'm happy to take an action to report back to the next school forum and investigate that if that helps.
If you could, please, that would be good. I mean, we've had this problem before, and then it got much better, and now it's we've got a bit of slippage again. So it's just trying to marry it up. And then finally, on page 3, I don't understand the asterisk that says report does not include maintain nursery funded places. I don't know what that means.
I'm not sure I can answer that either. My understanding is that the related paper is addressing maintained nursery schools. I'm hoping that's correct.
But my understanding was that any early years funding formula should be the same base rate paid to all, and you can make different allowances with your supplements.
I don't know if Yoki is able to assist us with that.
May I speak? Thank you. The Maintained Nursery School Supplement is addressed in the Maintained Nursery School paper, Angela. The Maintained Nursery School Supplement is based as a separate pot. Basically, early years block is broken into different pots of money, okay? It's based on 3 and 4 year-old universal entitlement, 3 and 4 year-old additional entitlement, 2-year-old funding, early years pupil premium, disability access fund, and Maintained Nursery School Supplement. Now, how we actually, each pot needs to view in its own, in its own right, because it is all based on participation of children. Any over and under participation of children, the DFE will either add to the pot or reduce the pot accordingly based on the January census participation. Now, in terms of Maintained Nursery School Supplement, it's based on the latest, census count that the DFE has, that, they have given us an indicative Maintained Nursery School Supplement pot that is being addressed in the next paper that we will discuss. So that's why there is that appendix that say Maintained Nursery School Supplement isn't included in that picture, in this paper. The other thing you need to also, bear in mind, the rates you've quoted on early years pupil premium and disability access fund, they are rates that have been increased by the DFE. It is not something that we have increased. It is, they are set rates that is been, that we've been told that has gone up. And that's what we've put in the paper. Now, you must view this as different pots. Each pot has its own mini regulation you have to work within. There are, criteria you've got to address. It's not because if there's an underspend, we'll just dish it out to everybody. It isn't. There are criteria to be met within each pot, and we're accountable for each pot within the early years block. Okay, my next question I want to address is on Joe Sanchez's question on Maintained Nursery School supplementary funding.
Yoki, I'm really sorry to interrupt. I just want us to clear up that point first of all before we move on, so we're not doing multiple things. Is I think that point on page 3, there's an asterisk that says report does not include maintained nursery funded places. Should that say does not include maintained nursery fund supplement? Is that
supplement? Maintained nursery school supplement.
Not places, it's supplement.
No, not places. It's not. It's just a supplement that's not included in there. The 3 and 4 year-old universal entitlement, additional entitlement, 2-year-old entitlement, all the rates are in that report that we are discussing.
No, that's fine. I think that makes sense if that says supplement rather than places. Angela.
I was just going to come in and say, not to try and teach grandma how to suck eggs. I've been doing this for a very, very long time and have a very good understanding of, and probably read all of the papers that back up what's said. And, so the funding block is actually called Maintained Nursery School Supplementary Funding, MNSSF. And that funding that has come into the authority has come in particular ways, but we'll discuss that when we get to the next paper. I don't think that line in this report is very helpful, because this report will go out to everybody. And I think that is in a separate paper, and hasn't got anything to do with the early years block. So I would suggest you remove it.
Can I say something?
Yes, of course.
If you look on the early years block, Maintained Nursery School Supplement forms part of the overall early years block.
Yes, I have the DFE papers in front of me.
I can show you the allocation statement if you want online right now.
Okay, I'm not having an argument with you. I'm just saying this is a paper that will be shared with the whole of the early years block. PVIs, Maintained Nursery Schools, everybody. That line in there, I think, isn't helpful for everybody. I'm not saying we don't need to have a conversation about it and it doesn't need to be somewhere else, but I don't think that's helpful. I read that thinking for maintained nursery schools, you were talking about funding the places differently.
No, what I can do is if it pleases you, I can amend that report to just increase one additional line to that table 1 to say what the maintained nursery school supplementary funding was for 21-22 and what it is for indicative for 22-23 at present as we receive it from the DFE.
So I just want to check I'm understanding this correctly. Angela, is your point that including that is an irrelevance to this?
To the early years block? Yeah.
Yes.
Because it's got nothing to do with PVIs. It's got nothing. We've got 4 maintained nursery schools that we're talking about that, could in the future be eligible for that funding, haven't previously all been eligible. So our next paper will take that. So the little bit where we, we'll talk about that, but this almost needs to be for maintained nursery schools only as a final note. Maintained nursery school supplementary funding will be, allocated in whatever way it is decided going forward.
Or even say is subject to a separate consultation, or a separate paper.
I just think if I didn't understand it, having worked, for 35 years in early years, I'm sure other people aren't going to understand it.
Chairman, if I can come in, I'm sorry, I can't raise my hand. I seem to be a co-host. So I'm happy to take away the comments from Angela and the offer of help from Yoki, if that helps, and try and reconstruct this in a way that makes sense.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it may just be as simple as removing that line.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. Yoki, sorry, please do go on to the next point. I just want to make sure we clear up things as we go.
Okay. In answer to Joe's question earlier, I just want to share with you on the DFE's website, on the guidance that was published on the 28th of January this year. Okay, it says that the school supplementary grant will only be payable to public sector employers. This means that further education colleges, sixth form colleges, independent learning providers, as well as private and voluntary sector early years providers will not be eligible to receive this funding. It also says the school supplementary grant will fund the following providers: maintained nursery schools, primary and secondary maintained schools, primary and secondary academies and free schools, all through maintained schools, all through academies, 16 to 19 maintained schools, 16 to 19 academies, city technology colleges. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
No, thanks, Yoki. That's useful to have that clarification. Joe, is your hand up for a new point there?
Yes, it is. Thank you, Yoki. I'll have a look at that and then double check that the numbers, the indicative grant that we've been given includes nursery numbers, because I'm not sure that the indicative numbers that we've been given does include the nursery children. So I'll double check that. But I just wanted to come back to Angela's point about, and if someone can clarify this for me, about the Disability Access Fund. First of all, Angela, I thought it was what you said there, which was what if there were people who could claim that. And then I had a reread a couple of times, and it seems like the DWP tells the DFE how many children in our local authority are in receipt of that. Then that money comes to the local authority, but then it goes out to everybody as just goes into the pot and goes to everybody. Is that right? Because that's what I read from the paper. And then I heard you say that, and I was thinking, so is there an £800 that if you've got DLA you can get? I don't understand. So Yoki, if you could really help us out with that, that'd be great.
The Disability Access Fund is part of the early years block. So there is guidance, obviously, on the early years funding, guidance. It will tell you, who's eligible, the eligibility, the pupils eligible for it. In terms of the detailed criteria, I'm afraid the early years team will obviously be able to help you. I will not, because
But
I do not.
does that £800 then go to the school, or does it go into the overall pot?
The £800, the allocation comes to the local authority, all right? And then, and obviously depending on the criteria, it is then being allocated to the eligible,
Okay.
participants that's eligible for it.
Thank you, that's really helpful. Thank you.
I think Sandra also put a comment in there about claiming that too.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm more interested now. Angela, have you accessed that fund then as well and had additional income from that?
So we have accessed it, but we have to put in an application. It doesn't come from the local authority don't make us aware of the children in our.
Oh, it's very quiet. I agree.
So that's why I'm asking how much. So you've now confirmed the money comes into the local authority. That pot is there. So what happens with that pot if that money's been allocated? Where is that money going when those claims haven't been made? Because we've got more children, you've got to prove their disability living allowance. So you've got to work with parents. They've got to prove it to us, bring the information there. We've got to put in an application, and then the funding will come to the setting. So I'm telling you, we've got 34 children with a high proportion of them with disability living allowance. And I think we've got 6 children who have been in receipt of disability living allowance. Sorry, Disability Access Fund.
Yeah.
Can I just come back there, James? Do you mind?
Yeah,
just
please do,
in terms of, from our perspective as one setting, we had no knowledge of this fund, and I think that's probably replicated across the area prior to agreeing to take a child with significant physical disabilities, and now are aware. The process was pretty straightforward with the support of the agencies involved with that child, and we've worked with for another. So I get that this is not necessarily a forum conversation, but it perhaps highlights the concerning issues around, what's on offer for our children in early years settings.
Yeah, no, agreed, and it would probably be. I mean, there's 2 things here. One is about, I guess, the origins of that block of money. Is that something that comes into the local authority as a lump sum that they then distribute according to applications? And then what are the eligibility criteria, and how do they publicise that to relevant providers?
Chairman,
I don't know, Tony, if that's...
Yeah, so it's published on the portal and on the web, so it is there. Again, if we need to help people find the links, we can provide that for the minutes. And there are criteria, and once applications are made, as members have just said, then the funding will follow. We don't know who those children are in advance. The money is allocated, as said, by formula.
Okay, so perhaps an action then, if we can, circulate those links with the minutes. I half wonder is, given that we're putting out the paper in circulation with the consultation, is whether it's actually worth including a link to the relevant place on the consultation paper as well. What may make people aware of specifically what that fund is there and for. Joe.
Sorry, I was just rereading the paper to get my head around what it says there. So I'm just going to go back to the wording that it says, and it says, so if it comes from the DWP, so the DWP doesn't tell us who they are, it just says there are 5 children who meet this criteria. Is that basically it, or 10 children, or 15, or 20, or 30? And then it's for individual schools to then say this child is one of those number. Is that basically it?
If I can, Chairman, mind.
Yeah, please do.
as you say, a formula is produced by not DWP but DFE, I think, and the money comes to us, and then people can bid against it. And if we don't spend any money, it goes back to DFE.
Then the explanation in the document isn't very clear, because you mentioned DWP sending information as to how many children there are. If that's not the case, then it needs to be clearer, because I've misread this completely.
Yeah, thank you. No, you're absolutely right. It is confusing. DWP manage the data and work with DFE to make sure the money goes in the right proportions to local authorities.
Right, so it's a proportional element. It's not about numbers or anything like that. So there's no idea about, that's why you have to have an application process to say you meet the criteria. But surely if you've got disability living allowance, you already meet the criteria.
Exactly right, but that's not the information that's given to us. That's why the process is we have the money, and there has to be bids demonstrating the DLA compliance. I can understand your frustration. I agree, absolutely.
Okay.
That
Thank
just
you,
seems,
Alexandra.
if I've understood this correctly, that seems like the most extraordinary system. The DWP knows who the eligible children are, but doesn't pay that directly, but they give a number, and they give the number to the local authority, and then settings have to bid on behalf of the children to match the original number. Is that correct?
Yes, in essence, that's correct. I understand it's not new. It's happened like this for a number of years.
No.
So it's good that we're having the conversation and people are becoming aware.
Yeah, it just strikes me there must be a simpler way of doing it. I mean, I don't mean on behalf of the local authority. I take it, it's unlikely to be within your gift, but yeah, I just wanted to check that was the mechanism. Anne-Marie.
Just can I suggest we're going to tie ourselves up in knots for this, and there is some significant business that we still need to get through, and this is not me telling you how to do your job, Chair, so please don't take it as that, but I wonder if it would probably be in all of our interests to better understand that. If Tony can undertake to write a paper for our next school forum that brings the detail in this in a way that we can all understand, which will ensure that we're not tying each other up in knots or tripping each other up and having this conversation, but we will prepare a paper for the next school forum that outlines all of it with its quirks and anomalies as we go through it, but so that we can all get the same understanding of the same quite tricksy issue.
Yeah, I completely take the point, Anne-Marie. I think, one of the things I would say is that obviously I know that, we've had this meeting scheduled specifically for early years because it hasn't been on the agenda. And I think there are some complicated issues here that it is worthwhile exploring to get to a shared understanding of where things are. But I will suggest, I can see Yoki's hands up and then Angela, and I'll suggest that if we take those two as final points and then conclude on this item. Yeah, Yoki.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to share with you the guidance on the DFE website on Disability Access Fund. May I share my screen for a moment?
Yeah, I think it's Raj that might need to give you permission there for that.
Yeah, Yoki, you should have permission. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, can you see it?
Yeah.
This is what it says on the DFE website. It says, obviously, it was introduced to support disabled children access for the entitlements for 3 and 4 year olds. Providers will receive at least £800 per eligible child per year. Okay, it says 3 and 4 year olds will be eligible for that if the child is in receipt of disability living allowance and the child receives the universal 15 hours entitlement. And clearly it says here that they do not have to take up the full 570 hours. Okay. It does also say that 4 year olds in primary school reception classes are not eligible for DAF funding. I mean, it's published on the DFE website, anyone can actually access it. You just need to, search for early years funding 22-23 and it's all there. Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Yoki. I mean, I think it's that section's really, really clear. guess it's the thing about the identification of that, because of course, you know, there will be government departments that know if the child is in receipt of DLA, and if you do receive DLA and then receive the universal 15 hours, you are automatically eligible under those criteria to DAF, but that doesn't happen automatically. The settings then have to know about that fund and then bid for it. I think it's perhaps that bit. But yeah, that's a really useful link. Thanks.
That's what I was trying to say, you know, there are different pots in the early years block, and each pot has its own unique criteria and requirements. So we need to abide by those. It's not like if one is underspent, oh, we can just dish it out to everybody else.
No. I quite see that it's a particular fund for a particular purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thanks. So in terms of concluding that that item, there were notes earlier about a need for a vote, but of course that needs to follow the consultation. So obviously, subject to some of the additional information that we've requested to go in the paper and the amendments in the questions that have been proposed, then obviously that consultation will run, and then we will have the results for the March 17th meeting. So I'm going to propose we just move on to item number 4, which is about the maintained nursery supplement. There's a fair amount of context in the paper and 3 different proposals there, and obviously this will also be subject to a consultation, but with a limited audience of the 4 maintained nursery schools. So Anne-Marie, I'll hand over to you if you're happy.
Thanks, James. So this second report covers, as James has just said, the maintained nursery supplement. So no other pots of money, just the maintained nursery supplement. And the maintained nursery supplement in Northamptonshire goes to the 4 maintained nurseries, which are Croyland, Highfield, Pengreen and Ronald Tree. What we are proposing to do is to distribute the funds in line with the Department for Education guidance, which in itself would not cause us a problem. But there are some occurrences of history that make this slightly more complicated, I think it's fair to say. So what is included in the paper is the background and a reference in there to the early years entitlements document from the Department for Education, if colleagues were minded to take a look at that themselves. What that document tells us is the maintained nursery supplement is not for any other purpose other than to support those maintained nursery schools and the distribution of funding against pupil participation in the universal 15-hour entitlement. And therefore, to do that, it is appropriate that the local authority consider, and Schools Forum consider, the participation within that 15-year-old entitlement across the 4 nurseries. And again, based upon our 21-22 data from January 21-22, I've included in the report the numbers of participation, and my colleague Kelly is on the call. So the data comes from the early years funding team. I've also included in there for ease, because they're large numbers. So for ease, of the 100% of all children that are engaged in that 15-hour universal entitlement, I've put it into percentages there, because I think percentage numbers are easier to access in terms of understanding the difference than they are the full numbers. So in order to ensure that there is an equitable distribution of funding against that participation, we need to look at those numbers, and that's where we find that we have a challenge, because what colleagues can see, there's a couple of challenges on the maintained nursery supplement. One, for the year 21-22, we distributed more funds than we received from the Department for Education. We have an indicative allocation year on year, and it's dependent exactly on the number of people who are participating and as a reporter to the census last year, and the number that we were expecting essentially and the number who actually participated were different, and therefore we had an amount of money clawed back by the DFE because we didn't have the participation in line with what we were projecting. That's not unique to us. It's not unusual. It is part of the ordinary process, and that's just how it happens. I think the challenge, you know, naming the elephant in the room here, when we look at the distribution in 21-22 of our maintained nursery supplement, we can see the participation numbers. So this is in figure 7 in the report. Our participation numbers in percentages and our award of funding are not equal. So as an example, Highfields, 23% of the children that were participating in the 15-hour universal entitlement there, which one is, yeah, Highfield, 23% of the children were participating. However, they only received 6% of the funding award. And across all 4 maintained nurseries, you can see that there are discrepancies in the number of children who are participating and the award of funding to those nurseries. 3 of those nurseries receive less funding than their participation numbers would suggest. 1 of those nurseries receives more funding than their participation numbers would suggest. It is with this in mind and the inequity then of the distribution and distribution that is outside of the regular, well, the regulation of the DFE, that it was necessary to submit to the Department for Education the disapplication request, recognising that we've got a significant discrepancy there in the award of funding to the 4 maintained nurseries against their participation. Again, disapplication is an ordinary process. It's not special or unique to us, but it's necessary that we alert the DFE. And I'm grateful that we have a colleague from the DFE on the call today to the fact that there is that discrepancy, and we are attempting to address it. Obviously, the discrepancy is significant, and having had conversations with the 4 maintained nursery heads, having had conversations with the lead member and indeed the chief exec and the director of finance within the local authority, in order to address a system where we fall entirely in line with the Department for Education's regulations in terms of the distribution of this funding, and don't detract everything from the nursery that receives more funding than the application of the formula would suggest they should. We know that we can't do that in year over 1 year, because the amount of money that would be lost by that 1 maintained nursery is significant against the application of funding. So in order to address that, there are 3 proposals. The first proposal is, should the Department for Education reject our request for disapplication, i.e. to operate in a way that's outside of the regulation, then proposal 1 shows how the distribution of funding for the maintained nursery supplement would be in line with the participation rates, and also demonstrates on there what the indicative funding allocation would be to each of those nurseries. So that is in proposal 1. Proposals 2 and 3, where they don't match the funding that DFE would have us distribute, they give different options that begin to more evenly and equitably distribute funding against the participation levels across all 4 of the maintained nurseries. Options 2 and 3 also give a minimum funding guarantee to the 3 nursery schools who, against participation, have been funded at a level lower than they might expect to be funded. 2 of those nurseries, colleagues can see from the paper, finished or started 2021-22 financial year in deficit. In deficit largely because, as you can see, they have, by the DFE regulation, been receiving less funding than they should have been receiving if we were to apply the principles that the DFE wish us to apply. I hope that my explanation hasn't served to confuse you. And I think, James, I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Anne-Marie. And I think that the paper is, you know, is clear on the issues there. I mean, not that any of us can kind of go back in time, but I want to check just on point 10 on that paper. So the situation has arisen because historically NCC used some of the maintained nursery supplement to commission a service level agreement, and they shouldn't have used. Is that not correct?
That's not correct. Anne-Marie, you happy for me to reply to this?
Yeah, of course, Angela.
Okay, so back in 15-16 or 16-17, I worked with Leslie Hagger, the then director, to raise the problem that Pen Green Centre has never only been a maintained nursery school. We were set up in 1983 as a fully integrated centre, as was Camrose at the time. So we worked with Camrose and we approached DFE and ministers, local politicians, and put a case forward for the integrated nature of our work. At the time, this was to try and maintain the levels of funding that were received in 16-17 for the maintained nursery schools. So as part of our centre, there was recognition that we were a very unique model. And because the breadth of our work, they acknowledged that we should be in receipt of payment for our then core funding, which was for this integrated model. Anne-Marie has a copy of that letter that came from ministers to say that the funding that would be received by the local authority was for Pen Green and Camrose. So on top of that, maintained nursery schools also received some supplementary funding, which was made up in some recognition for the statutory responsibilities and duties that we have above and beyond PDIs. I wasn't part of any conversation at that point for trying to secure funding for all maintained nursery schools. So the pot of money that came in initially was particularly for Pen Green and Camrose. And year on year, and I'm sure the people who have been in forum, because it feels like for the last decade, I've been having to have these conversations. We have asked finance officers to go back to DFE and be challenging this. This has been a problem for the maintained nursery schools since 12-13, when we worked on what solutions were we going to find to ensure that the maintained nursery schools were funded appropriately, and that we weren't going to reach a point where we were going to be in deficit budgets. Then, you know, we went forward with the early years single funding formula, and since then there has just been the demise. This is a national problem, not a local authority problem. And again, I come back to what have the local authority done to support those maintained nursery schools, to ensure that their budgets are being supported. As far as I'm concerned, what's happening at the moment is a little sticking plaster and moving some of that about. This is a big problem. This sticking plaster is going to destabilise all 4 maintained nursery schools. Lindsay and Deb are working extremely hard to maintain their nurseries. They both had children's centres. Ronaldtree had special provision. The local authority, when they've been cost cutting, have removed those services from their nurseries. And what we've seen is them now struggling to manage budgets. Pengreen has continued with the integrated service model. We aren't just a nursery school. We manage 4 children's centres, have a budget from that. We have 3 early years provisions, ones that we're managing off-site, and we work as a year-round model. So we are different and have always been funded differently. And DFE, DFE guidance, I see what it says, but that funding was given directly for Pengreen, and that funding has continued to come to the local authority. We've continued to be funded, and now there are some questions about it, and it's let's share it more equitably. So to me, this is an exercise to try and balance budgets, where again, we should be fighting to save all nursery schools in the authority. And I have said to Anne-Marie, I'm more than happy to fight to save the other nursery schools, but it becomes a very emotive thing when actually you're going to crucify, and actually it will have catastrophic impact. There will be no other school in this county or this authority where the consideration is to take between 57% and 78% or whatever it is of your core budget.
Thanks, Angela. I do understand it is a really difficult and an emotive issue. The bit I suppose the bit I guess we could do with clarification on is when you say, Angela, about that model that was, in a sense outside of the norm, the integrated model that DFE approved in 12-13, and that that was where the supplement came from. Yep. Does that mean that because of that we receive additional money into that maintained nursery supplement than if we were in any other local authority with 4 maintained nursery schools? Sorry, Anne-Marie, it's probably the local authority to say that.
James, to my knowledge, and according to the finance, we receive the dedicated schools grant as we've outlined, and to be distributed in line with the recommendations, which again that we are familiar with and increasingly familiar with. I have, just to provide reassurance to Forum, and to pick up on the point that Angela asked, the question that she raised, I have written to the Department for Education, and I have asked the Department for Education for the detail of any additional funding that they believe the local authority are in receipt of to fund the additionality or the uniqueness that Angela states is delivered through Pengreen. So let me be absolutely clear, with the distribution of the dedicated schools grant for early years, we're absolutely following, as Angela pointed out, and I'm grateful for that, we're absolutely following the letter of that instruction from the DFE and that regulation, which is proper and is transparent. I am pursuing with the DFE any alternative, additional, supplementary arrangement that they believe is in place or has been in place that would set the funding of Pengreen aside and outside of the DFE regulation on DSG. As soon as I get written confirmation of that, which is what I've asked for, then I will be happy to share, obviously in the first instance with Angela, so that we can reflect on whatever I receive back. I'll share it with my colleagues within the local authority, and then we will determine what needs to happen, and should we believe that that's a matter that needs to come back to the schools forum because it is outside, it would be outside of the dedicated schools grant, then we will bring it back. But it is being pursued as a separate issue to the distribution of the maintained nurseries supplementary funding.
So the position, so local authorities' position is at the moment that the understanding is the money we get should then be distributed in accordance with DfE regulations, which is to split it equally based on participation rates, and that if there is the kind of additionality or special case of Pen Green, that there's an agreement to fund that outside of that, then that should be either additional money or separated out from the way in which the maintained nursery supplement is distributed. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's my understanding of it, James. In the black and white of it, that's absolutely it. However, the reason that would then be proposal, option 1, because that is distribution in line with participation, which is really simple in that sense. If we find, and I appreciate that Angela and Joe, and there are probably others on the call that have been closer to the longer history of this, and I appreciate that I'm very late to a party that's been going on for quite some time now. I use the word party loosely. It's not a reference to our colleagues in Westminster. What if the distribution of funding previously has been a continuation of previous grant funding or a continuation of different funding arrangements, then obviously I've been unable to get through that. Yes, Angela is correct. All of the correspondence, I'm very grateful to Angela that we're trying to work together to understand this in a way that is not to the detriment of any of our children across Northants. And Angela's been very gracious and patient with me as we're trying to get our head around this and understand all of those documents and all of that long history. But what we need to do in order to be equitable across the 4 maintained nurseries is distribute in line with the funding arrangement. And Angela is supportive of that. There is still a question though that we need to uncover with the DfE about any additional funding arrangements, or previously, historically, if the local authority have made payments potentially, and I'm not saying that this is the case, but potentially if they have made payments that historically related to a different type of arrangement, made those payments to Pen Green through the maintained nursery supplement. And that is an issue that is lacking clarity for me at this stage, but we will continue to unpick. And given that my colleague from the DfE is observing, is on the call, I think it will be useful to my colleagues from the DfE to understand that the predicament that both Angela and Tracy as heads of Pen Green and I as the DCS in Northants now have a predicament that neither of us are wrong, but neither of us have a simple solution to this, and we will require support from our colleagues at the DfE to unpick this, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Yoki, I think your hand was next.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to share with Schools Forum our allocation for DSG for early years block, okay? I think it will give you a better understanding of what I've been saying so far. So may I share my screen?
Yep, you can share if you're able, yeah.
Okay, can you see my screen? So this is Northamptonshire's DSG allocation. As you can see, we get 3 and 4-year-old funding, and both for our part-time equivalents, the part-time equivalents that we have participating, and obviously this is for the universal entitlement, and this is for the additional entitlement, and then clearly this is the funding for the 2-year-olds, and this is our allocation for 22-23. And this is our allocation for early years pupil premium and for disability access. Now, I now come on to the maintained nursery school supplement. Okay. Now, for the maintained nursery school supplement, it is £4. It's given to us by the DfE at the rate of £4.73 an hour. okay, and it's based on part-time equivalent, which means it is the participation of our children in the maintained nursery schools. At present, the figure they have is 346.17 PTEs, which then gives us next year's allocation of 933K that you see in your in Anne-Marie's report. So which in total will give us our entire early years block, which forms part of our DSG. In addition, I'd like to share with you is what Anne-Marie is trying to do is, you know, we are just trying to follow the DFE's guidance of what, how we should actually distribute the funding to our maintained nursery schools for their maintained nursery school supplements. Now, if you look at it, it says that, you know, that local authorities with MNS will continue to receive supplementary funding for 22-23, okay? This is provided to enable local authorities to protect the 2016-17 funding rates for the universal 15 hours of maintained nursery schools. It doesn't talk about all the other bits outside of the 15-hour entitlement, okay? And the government expects it to be used in this way. And then it says, as mentioned in universal base rate, all providers must be paid the same hourly base rate. It also applies to maintained nursery schools. However, authorities may continue to use lump sums to distribute additional funding to maintain nursery schools. What we're trying to do, obviously, is to apply the, you know, the equality principle that what the DFE have asked us to do in Anne-Marie's paper. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Yoki. Angela.
I was just going to come back in with thinking about how this is applied, and it's great that we have a colleague here from the SFA, because actually I think when this was all started and first set up, this was before the rollout of 30 hours and the real push to support families and get families back in, trying to, you know, all the language that's used, level up, do all of these things, etc., etc. So, you know, we are now being penalised for taking children for 30 hours because we've worked really hard in Corby to support families to go back to work. Again, a conversation Tracy and I have had with Anne-Marie was about the unintended consequences of, you know, what's happened in the reduction in numbers. These numbers are based on COVID. You know, the numbers are based on the hardest time for all of us. Schools were closed, but early years settings weren't allowed to close. You know, we had to keep going throughout that pandemic. So of course our numbers were going to be earlier in January, and that's where, you know, that's where this is taken from. You know, it's the same with, you know, any other maintained nursery schools. So our numbers are going to look lower, however our places are filled. If you look back to the 15-16 technical guidance, they actually talked about children, they actually talked about places, not children, and then that guidance was changed when we moved to 30 hours. So in terms of the government and what they're saying, they either want us to support it or we don't, because we could then say, okay, then we're no longer going to take 30 hours and we'll only take universal children if that's what we're going to be measured on, and that's what's going to drive our funding to come through. You know, and then what happens to those children, and where do they go, and we lose quality and all of those things. You know, and I think these are the challenges for nursery schools where they've got, you know, a budget that is reducing and reducing. You know, it's really difficult to be able to offer those places there. I think it's a really, and in our letter from DFE, they talk about it being very technical and very complex. It is, and unless you're on the floor, and it's a real balancing act, and you know, we're not just talking about funding, trying to balance a budget. You know, we're really trying to look at how can we do the best for children and families. And you know, they do say about the 15 hours, but you can give lump sums. So you know, I think again we need to unpick and go back to that lump sum. But I don't want to just talk about Pen Green here, because I think there's a much bigger issue also about our maintained nursery schools. And you know, at this moment, you know, we're talking about being more equitable. Well, equitable is not about giving everybody the same or trying to do that. You know, we have to put the money where the money is needed. And in those nursery schools, money is needed, but money is needed for their survival. You know, so how are we going to do that? And again, I come back to who's going back to be lobbying at government for this. We've all been focused on, you know, nursery schools, ourselves surviving, but in local authority, who's been going back? Because I know I have asked year on year about who's going back to ask about that funding, and nothing's happening. Yes, we've had Brexit, we've had COVID, but no longer they can be the excuses. You know, Anne-Marie, on your watch, sadly, at the moment, there are 4 nursery schools when this proposal that goes through will be destabilised. Yes, there'll be, you know, we might see 3 of them being stabilised for a short term, but that funding is only there at this moment in time till 2025. It's a short-term fix. And then for, you know, catastrophic implications for the 4 nursery schools. That, you know, this is a national problem. We have seen a demise. We had 500 back in 16, 17. We're down to about 350 nationally. You know, we either need to say that we want to have maintained nursery schools in this local authority, and we do our best to support them and work with them and find a long-term sustainable future, or we put a sticking plaster on it, rob Peter to pay Paul, and let's see what happens in a couple of years.
Thanks, Joe. Do you want to come in there?
It's just a historical perspective in the sense that if we were to look at minutes from probably the last 10 years worth of Schools Forum, because I think that might be how long I've been here, we've had this very long discussion about this funding every single year. Various things have been put into place and various changes have been made over time. This is a very thorny issue that has been discussed and discussed and discussed and isn't going to go away. And I completely understand Angela's point of view, perspective, and the points that she's made about the overall funding. So if anybody's listening to that, then that's really important. Can I just ask, is the same principle being applied in the West to Camrose, or is that not for us to discuss?
That's not for us to discuss, Joe. Okay. There was some, and just for context, because I know this has been frustrating for some colleagues to get their heads around it. When we were, you know, until April, we were one body of people, but there was some challenges in December when one of our Northampton settings was discussed in the West Schools Forum. It's not appropriate. We're not there to account.
That's fine. Yeah, I'll read their minutes.
Yeah, do. Publicly available. Help yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, I completely take your point, Angela. It's about all 4 nursery schools, and it's about a national issue of funding. I think that is absolutely right. I think the difficult thing that is before us is that principle that is there, I guess, in the DFE guidance, that the way in which that supplement should be split should be equitable based on participation, and what should be provided through kind of, I guess, your discussions with the historic discussions with the DFE and backing for that model is an additional sum that is separate from that maintained nursery supplement for the services that you deliver. That, I guess, the issue has been that now needs to be concluded one way or another. So we're not talking about this for the next 10 years, is actually what is the sum that should be disaggregated equally based on participation rates, and what is the sum that is there for the additional services. Otherwise, it's never going to, or unlikely ever to, go away or get resolved. And I think, is that the conversation, Anne-Marie, that you've asked the DFE for, is actually, is there an agreement that...
Yeah, and I think, to be absolutely clear, James, as the 2 authorities have disaggregated, this is not the only area of business across children's services that has a similar challenge. I don't need to go into those other areas now, but you know, this issue is not unique to the funding of Pen Green.
Yeah.
And yes, that absolutely is. You know, I am conscious that, you know, for many, many years, Angela and Tracy have pursued this. You know, I recognise from the comments that Joe has made that this has been an ongoing issue. I feel really strongly that actually this is an issue that whatever the result is that we get from the DFE, we need an answer on this issue this year, because otherwise we will be in the, you know, we will be in the hamster's wheel of this issue for years and years to come. And what we need now is we need a definitive from the DFE about any special or other arrangements that are there for Pen Green and or any other establishment across West or North Northants, but I'm only concentrating on North Northants, and also assurance across the board that actually the local authority are following the letter of the DFE guidance to the law in terms of the distribution, and are also working as hard as we can to be as transparent as we can in how these decisions are made. Now, we won't get it right all of the time, first time, of course we won't, nor will we get it right where everybody is happy. And in fact, I think this situation, you know, not meaning to be emotive, but I think this situation with a maintained nursery supplement is at risk of nobody being happy any of the time, instead of not being able to keep everybody happy all of the time. So I do feel, from the perspective of the 4 maintained nurseries and from the perspective of the local authority, nobody's particularly happy with the situation we find ourselves in, but we have to be brave and we have to be bold. And if there is guidance there that we need to adhere to, we need to adhere to it to ensure that in time there is parity here and that settings are funded in line with the spirit of the guidance. So, you know, I hear Angela when she's telling me that on my watch that, you know, all of these nurseries and the system will be destabilized, and you know, that is what it is. I can't, you know, we will do whatever we can, and I will do whatever I can with the right political support from my leaders. I work in a member-led authority, and I will take the direction from the leader and from the exec on how I proceed with this in my conversations with the Department for Education, and that is absolutely the best I can do.
Okay, can I come in, James?
Please do, yeah.
So, Anne-Marie, can I just clarify, are you saying, so in the indicative budget for 22-23, it would appear that the supplementary fund is 933,309, and you're saying that is based on the universal take-up for Croyland, Highfields, Pen Green, and Croyland, Highfields, Ronaldtree, and Pen Green. That's what that money is.
Yeah, that's what the answer is, unless Yoki tells us it's any different. That's exactly what that's the money that we've received, and it's against that participation. That's correct, Yoki?
That is what the table I shared with you just now says, is based on the part-time equivalent. Now, part-time equivalent, according to the guidance, is the 15 hours, universal entitlement.
Okay, just so when I go back to DFE. So can I just be clear then on the proposal? Proposal 1 would see Pen Green losing £798,782 per year. Proposal 2 would be 691,474, and proposal 3 would be 581,518 pounds per year. So can I just ask today, if this is going to be something that you want sewn up before the end of this financial year, You know, what have we got in terms of planning redundancies, the timeframes, a consultation with the union? We're a organisation with 120 staff, all employed under the school's contract.
Chair, if I might, I mean, it's not appropriate for me to comment on that at this stage. I think the points that Angela has raised are relevant, and I think a lot of this work will need to be done through the consultation and will need to be done as we come to at the end of the consultation for us to look at in March. And I think in the background, Angela, just to remind you that, you know, what I have said is I am also pursuing with the DFE any special or other arrangements that might be in place. We haven't had a definitive from the DFE on that. The DFE might come forward and say, well, actually, you know, there is X amount of funding that isn't available separately, and it has been awarded to the local authority previously through X. And if you look in this pot, then that's where you'll find the money. And our expectation is that that amount of money goes to Pen Green. And if we find that, then that's the situation. But what we are talking about today, and I think what we appreciated early in the conversation, is this is an application, option 1. If the DFE don't support a disapplication, then option 1 would be the case. Option 2 and 3 are options that the local authority have put forward that don't fully apply the principles of this funding to all 4 nurseries, but are 2 options that look to address some of the imbalance that is currently delivered through this. So, you know, if we go back to currently 21-22, 85% of that maintained nursery supplement against 36% of participation is paid to Pen Green. 4% of the funding is paid to Croyland against 16% of the participation. So colleagues can see that there isn't. Let's be absolutely honest about this. None of us believe that there is an easy means of solving this and a solution. If there is another source of funding that should be coming to Pen Green, then that absolutely would be the answer. But that source of funding is not the maintained nursery supplement, because there are regulations around how that is distributed. So if we find that whatever has happened in our history has created this situation, then I believe that we would be looking at a 3-year plan to bring in, assuming the maintained nursery supplement is around for that long, we would be looking, because at this stage there is only a 12-month agreement on that, we'd be looking at a 3-year plan to bring that into parity across the 4 maintained nurseries.
Sorry, Anne-Marie, I did tell you wrong about a year on it. There is actually there until the end of this spending review. So it is until 2025. I clarified that with DFE yesterday.
Well, that's great. So across that period, then we would come into balance against the regulation.
So my concern is we would come into balance in that 3 years, but actually at that 3 years, that money may go completely. And then that's what I'm saying. In the longer term, my fear is that we're going to wipe out all 4 nursery schools, because 3 of them are going to think that they're going to get balance. We're going to have to try and balance to what effect? So when I was saying, you know, yes, we're talking at Pen Green, because obviously this is the bit that where the majority of funding is being looked at, but actually my colleagues from the other 3 nursery schools, you know, what are we going to do to help them in that time? Because this is going to feel like a really good fix to them. They're going to get a lovely uplift, but actually on a short-term measure.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, you know, this is not, you know, there are many issues around this, and there is much emotion around this, and there are many challenges around this. The issue that we are putting on the table today, we're putting on a series of proposals. We're going through a consultation. This is literally about a very transactional arrangement about the distribution of funding against the maintained nursery supplement the long-term future of maintained nurseries, the future funding arrangements, none of those things are under consideration today. Under consideration today, and the start of the proposal today, is about a very transactional distribution of funds in line with the DFE regulation around the funding of maintained nursery supplement.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I really appreciate, Angela, what you're saying. You are right. There is there's a long-term conversation to be had about, what would happen if that money disappeared in 2025. I think the thing that is hopefully helpful is having somebody from the ESFA on the call today, and of course, as Anne-Marie says, as Northamptonshire have put in this application notice, what would be really helpful is, if part of that we got some clarity on that, about actually what is that core supplement to be distributed equally between the 4 maintained nursery schools, and if there is a DFE agreement to fund the additionality, what is it and what should that be? And then you're right, it doesn't put everything to bed forever, but it does provide everybody with some clarity, and that would be obviously the most helpful outcome in resolving it. I just wanted to try and draw to a conclusion in a moment, but I can see Paul and then Angela have got hands up. So Paul.
Thanks, Chair. I think actually the point I was going to make is what you have made. I don't believe that until we've got the clarification from the DFE, we can make a sensible decision on whether any of the funding is expected to be held back as a lump sum for Pen Green, or whether it is all to be distributed in the way that it appears to be received, because the money does appear to be received based on a participation. That clarification will allow, hopefully for the next meeting, us to make a sensible decision in this area, I think. And as you say quite rightly, the future funding, not just for nurseries and maintained nurseries, but for the whole sector, comes up as part of the spending review, and will again. And at that point, we'll have to work out how the distribution of that goes. But that's not for now, and it's not for us. We'd have no influence over the total way that the system is funded, is my view.
Angela.
Can I just say on point 13, where it says Pen Green have got an uncommitted balance of £314,362, that isn't accurate. That is committed funding. And at the time when it was COVID and we hadn't recruited a post, rather than recruit and make somebody redundant, we didn't recruit a post, and we've got some large pieces of building work and things that are taking place that we've been holding that money for. So it isn't uncommitted. And then finally, my final point is, and a plea to you really, we've got until the end of March. Please, can you make contact with the maintained nursery schools? So Ronald Tree, Croyland, Highfield, ourselves, to come and understand, because I don't know that many of you certainly will have been in Pen Green and understand the breadth of work, and likewise for Croyland, Ronald Tree, Highfield. Let those head teachers tell you what it's been like and give you their history, so you can understand it. Yes, we have to adhere and may have to adhere to DFE and those kind of things, but that will help us to start to shape our challenge to DFE and central government about a sector that is really underrepresented and underfunded. And if this is the foundations for our children's education, then we all should want to do that. So please make contact with Lindsay or Deb or myself and Tracy.
Is that an invitation to all of us, Angela?
It's an invitation to everybody to come to Pen Green, and I'm sure Lindsay and Deb would be really, really happy to host you at their schools too.
James,
thank you.
James,
Yeah.
sorry, I didn't mean to come across you there. Just so colleagues are clear, I have been in touch with Lindsay and Deb, and obviously Angela and Tracy. So just to clear that up. And also in terms of the uncommitted balances, the uncommitted balances that are reported in the report are uncommitted revenue balances. They were reported to the local authority as uncommitted revenue balances as of the 31st of March last year. And also there were capital balances, and we haven't included the capital balances in there. So the capital balances were as an aside. So the capital balances, which colleagues will be clear, are for building works. We didn't contain in this paper. So just a point of clarity, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Yoki.
I just want to reiterate Anne-Marie's point, the uncommitted balances on there, that was what the information that was received for, at the end of 2021, but, from the school, which was then submitted as CFR to the DFE. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Yoki. So just in terms of next steps from this is, given the discussions about all of that, and obviously the request from the DFE and the recognition that, of course, it's within the DFE's gift to accept or not the disapplication criteria, should then, when this goes out as the consultation for the 4 maintained nursery schools, should it just have the caveat that it says that, I guess, assuming that the Department for Education confirm that this is how they would expect the maintained nursery supplement to be distributed, what are your thoughts on those 3 proposals? So in case the DFE then do get back and say, well, actually, it was always our expectation that something different should be done with this pot, then there is coverage of that, and that we're not kind of, I guess, delaying the process and waiting for something from DFE and would be in that position forever. Does that sound reasonable? You can probably word it more effectively than that, Anne-Marie, but just something that explains that, assuming the DFE guidance to us is that this is how they expect that supplement to be distributed. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, James, that's absolutely fine. I can do that. And just for colleagues, just to prove that we do listen occasionally, contrary to often popular opinion, the consultations on this occasion will go out electronically because that was the feedback from the school's consultation. So we've made steps in the right directions. Fingers crossed that it works, because otherwise you might be consulting to a black hole somewhere and we'll have to start again. And none of us want to do that. So I will send the maintained nursery supplement consultation to the 4 maintained nurseries tomorrow. If it is available this evening, and I've got the link this evening, I'll send it out this evening, but worst case scenario, that will go out tomorrow. The wider consultation around the funding will go out to the entirety of the sector. And again, it'll be my colleague, Kelly, who oversees that and ensures that goes out to all settings. So that will happen tomorrow. We will make sure that we cover off, and I will continue to pursue this with all my might with the Department for Education in the meantime. And should it change, and should I get anything back from the DFE, I have committed with the 4 heads, or the 3 heads of the 4 nurseries, that I will communicate with them as soon as I know information that would impact on any of this, James. And should it be significant, then I'm happy as well that via Raj we will communicate that to school forum members if there is something significant that you guys would need to know. But otherwise, the consultation finishes, and I'm going from memory now, so forgive me, the consultation I believe finishes on the 3rd of March. And the reason it finishes on the 3rd of March is to enable us to pull those consultation responses together. It'll not be me reading hundreds of documents this time and taking them into a separate one, so I'm pleased about that. That consultation feedback will be put into a report, and that report with these papers that we've had today will come to the next school forum, so that colleagues on the call can be clear exactly what the consultation has told us, to assist us in making the decisions as we go forward. But again, I will incorporate anything that I receive from the Department for Education, particularly around the Maintain Nursery supplement, with that consultation feedback, so that we make the most defensible and the most transparent decisions for the funding of the Maintain Nursery supplement, as well as the other elements.
Right, perfect. That's great. Thanks, Anne-Marie. I'm just going to move on to item 5, which is Raj, just for schools forum plan. I think, you know, we probably know where we need to be on the 17th, but yeah, over to you, Raj.
Yeah. So as you said, the next meeting is on the 17th of March. We'll bring back the outcomes from the previous meeting. So as you mentioned earlier, the terms of reference for the task and finish group. Also, the schools forum plan we currently have only goes up to the next meeting. So at the next meeting, we'll have an item on what we'd like our work program to be for the course of the next year, and what kind of topics we want to explore. Yeah, other than that, that's about it really. So if anyone has any questions.
That's great. Thanks, Raj. Finally, any...
Sorry, Chair. Raj, can we just make sure that we, before it comes back next March, that we populate any of the big key business that we need to do over the course of the year that is immovable, like the budget setting and the consultations? Because I appreciate, not anybody's fault, but I appreciate this year we've been running to stand still on some of these occasions, particularly around the consultation. And I'd like to think that colleagues are less rushed and less pressured to get these things done in the right timescales next year. So if we could program that ahead, that would be hugely helpful.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
Thanks,
agreed.
James.
Yeah, agreed. No, that's a good point. And finally, any items of urgent business? Neil.
Apologies, Chair. I think I should have raised this under the minutes, but I just wanted to let Forum know that the proposal for the distribution of high needs funding to schools did go out on this Monday through the Heads newsletter. And if anyone hasn't got that, then or hears of anyone who hasn't seen or got that, please do contact me, because we want to ensure everyone's had the opportunity to see that. So that's just a follow up from the last meeting. And like I say, apologies, that should have been on the comment on the minutes.
No problem. Thanks, Neil. Anything further? Thank you, everyone, for your time, and look